You have a lot of military defections in Iran. I don't blame them.
Thank you, Mr. President. Have you talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields?
Yeah, I did. I told him don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
President Trump talking about defections, he says. That is a key to what is happening in Iran, obviously, regime change. Who will be left after we hear about more and more eliminated leaders every day? My next guest has talked about regime change in Iran. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton with a brand new piece in the Wall Street Journal arguing that if the president is not committed to removing Iran's leadership, then he should not have initiated such an expansive military operation in the first place. We are pleased to have Ambassador Bolton on to discuss this. He's obviously the former National Security Advisor under President Trump, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and worked at the State Department. It's been a moment, sir. It's good to have you back here. Welcome in this Friday.
Glad to be with you.
All right, let's just start with that. The stakes couldn't be higher, as you put out with this piece in the Wall Street Journal. If this regime does not topple, critical areas, oil, international terrorism, and nuclear weapons, right there, grave risks. But taking out one person seems to lead to just another crazy person. As we see, they take out Larjani, and now, well, the next person, he was participating in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran takeover in 1979. So how do you have a successful regime change here, Ambassador Bolton?
Well, what you need is to destroy the instruments of state power in Iran that threaten us and that also repress the people of Iran. And that's principally the Revolutionary Guard and key elements of that, the Quds Force, which handles their foreign terrorist activity, and the besieged militia, which is what represses the people domestically. And you combine that with really significant elimination of top layers of government, which is well underway here now. That alone won't topple the regime, but it will say to everybody inside Iran, the regime can't defend itself. And if it can't defend itself, it's not going to remain in power long, which tells even people in the regime, generals in the regular army, for example, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the conventional military, you know, this ship's going to go down, and they may not want to go down with it, which
right.
is if these reports of defections and people coming over to the opposition is true, that is a potentially important sign that the regime is destabilizing and coming apart at the top, which is the foundation of regime change.
One of the Bashir's leaders taken out in a tent, obviously the psychological impact there might be they can find us anywhere. So that looks like that could be going in a very successful route. Not as easy is the Strait of Hormuz, which you know very well has been NATO allies put out a vague statement now, Ambassador, saying, oh, well, we're sort of willing to get involved, but President Trump calling them cowards. And you've been on the record saying it is their war as well. And the fact that the United States has helped with Ukraine obviously is something that the Europeans need to think about. But realistically, now we're getting into another layer here with the Strait of Hormuz. Do we take Kharg Island? And if so, is that an occupied force with U.S. troops there? And if so, how long?
Well, I think taking Kharg Island is one way to shut off the flow of Iranian oil, which to me, somewhat unbelievably, has continued while this war is going on. So the oil from our friends in the Gulf Arab states is not leaving the Gulf, but Iranian oil is. I mean, I think we should blockade the Iranian shipments. Another way to do it is to take Kharg Island, which would pretty well eliminate their capacity to lift any substantial amount of oil. I don't think that's a long-term operation. It's well apart from the mainland. It may well be difficult to do. I think we'd have to have a careful military judgment on that. But what we need to do long-term in any event is make sure that the Iranian government cannot close the Strait or make tanker traffic in the Gulf itself unsafe. The insurance companies, the ship owners are just not going to let these ships go while they're worried about hostilities. And if I were to have any criticism of the military side of this campaign, I would say that protecting traffic through the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz should have been a higher priority earlier.
All right, that leads me to this. Do you think that the time was right to go in and do this now? Obviously, Iran's been able to play a long game. They've had money. They've been able to be ready for this. And, you said should have been, thought of, but they did go in. This was, one of the things Joe Kent said. He didn't think Iran was an imminent threat. Do you think this was the right time to go in for the administration? And if so, what do you think it was? Was it the intelligence that they could have had such a successful strike with the Ayatollah, Ambassador?
Well, I think it was the right time to go in. I don't think the nuclear threat was imminent, but I don't think the United States is required to risk the imminent destruction of our people before we take preventative action to remove the threat. We don't have to live under the threat. That's just simply unacceptable. And I do think that the moment was right. I think the regime in Tehran is as unpopular and as weak as it's been at any point since it took power in 1979. There's dissatisfaction all across the country. The economy is in the tank. The young people who constitute under 30 or 2/3 of the population know they could have a different life. They can see it across the Gulf and on the internet when the regime lets it operate. Women have been opposed to the regime ever since at least the murder of Mahsa Amini 3 years ago, a young Kurdish woman who refused to wear the hijab. Ethnic groups like the Kurds, the Azeris, the Baluchis, Arabs are dissatisfied. This regime is very weak, and it can be pulled apart at the top. And that's what, in effect, what we in Israel are doing right now. Now, the rest of the burden, a lot of it is going to have to be carried by the opposition inside Iran. We should be aiding them, giving them communications assistance, money, weapons if they wanted. I think this is a time where we've staked a lot on this. We need to win.
Well, there was talk that might be happening, but complicated, obviously, with the Kurds and what that means. But what about the Houthis today issuing a statement that they might actually jump in on this as well? Obviously, that would be another layer to this. How would that complicate things? And as we look towards this mission and where it goes, how do you have an off-ramp on it as well ahead of the midterms?
Well, that's a question that Trump needs to contemplate politically, obviously. But the Houthis in Yemen last year and in times before that had tried to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the bottom end, the southern end of the Red Sea. And they get their weapons, their capability to threaten traffic through the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait from Iran. So if you leave the regime of the Ayatollahs in place in Tehran, they'll simply keep supplying the Houthis, and there will be two major elements of worldwide maritime commerce at the mercy of a bunch of religious fanatics in Iran. And, it's been a principle of American foreign policy. Leave aside the nuclear threat and the terrorism threat. It's been central to our foreign policy since before we were a country that we insisted on freedom of the seas.
Yeah, Ambassador, you can kind of see with how difficult this is, why maybe other presidents never wanted to take it head on. President Trump he is trying to create more peace, more stability in the Middle East. My final question to you is, we have a lot of allies and friends in the Gulf. They've come around in ways where we have not just business, but normalization, Abraham Accords expanding, and you have Iran saying that these parks, recreational areas, tourist destinations won't be safe. That's difficult as well, as the people who sit in the Gulf are directly impacted by that, but yet they are America's allies. What's your diplomatic advice for that? Because that's a difficult needle to thread too, continue to hang on when it's a war they didn't initiate, but they're right there on the front lines.
Well, I think that kind of conduct by Iran shows what barbarians the leadership among the Ayatollahs is. And I think in most cases, not all, but in most cases in the Gulf, the Arab states are moving toward a decision to join us in the offensive operations. They're not there yet, but they spent years trying to placate the regime in Iran. And for all that they tried to do, what they're getting are civilian targets in their country's hit. And as I say, if they needed any convincing or further proof of how risky, how dangerous the regime of the Ayatollahs is, this is it. And that's further proof why it must be removed.
Interesting. And today, a holiday there, of course, the end of Ramadan, as they will gather, and again, the war, and it is the Persian New Year in Iran. Ambassador John Bolton, such a pleasure to have you. I really hope you come back as we continue to watch developments, especially in Kharg Island as well in the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, thanks for having me.